So, good afternoon, and welcome to the first episode of a new series that we are calling Himmel at Home, in which staff and friends of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library will offer short little reflections on some of the work that we do, some of the materials that we work with at the library. The very first mini-series in this new series is titled Structuring the Hours of Your Day. And over the next few weeks, I will be giving some insights into the idea of daily prayer and how that prayer was used in the past to structure people's lives in a different time. And still today, many people structure their lives around a regular cycle of prayer. I'd also like to welcome you to the dining room of the Heintzelman and Zitzowitz residence in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which has been doubling for the last few weeks as my office at home. So I've had to make sure that I'm the only one here at the moment to do this. I'd like to just kick it off by moving into a little bit of a talk today about how Benedictine tradition has turned into this ability to pray throughout the day. So let's see if I can move my slides. There we go. So this, the idea of time is something that has come to all of us, I think, in recent weeks, as we've been forced into this situation where we are needing to redefine how we use our time, how we structure our days. That the normal routine of getting up in the morning and showering and eating breakfast and then hopping in your car and driving to the office and then breaking for lunch and then coming home at the end of the day is not the cycle that we're currently experiencing. It can be little things we don't think about. It might be that we can do laundry during the day that we would only do on the weekend. It might be that we have an extra hour every day that we're not driving around in the car. These are all things that are suddenly very different. That and the fact that we're all experiencing a lot of this through isolation, much like the picture that you see on the screen right now, which is of a young Benedict, Saint Benedict, in his cave when he was a teenager or in his 20s, praying with his books and being helped by a very distant monk giving him food in a basket, and being watched over by a devil in the corner who wants to tempt him. So this is kind of the experience that we're working out right now. What is the story of our lives? How are we experiencing time today? I like to think that this comes out of a thing that has struck me many times, and that is today, if you talk to someone, if you talk to students, you talk to people around you, we are all experiencing time as almost simultaneous. That is to say, if we look at our phones, we look at our computers, we look at our televisions, the time is going to be exactly the same no matter which one you're looking at. It's always going to change at the same second, at the same minute, at the same hour. And yet only 15 years ago, you could look at things look at a situation where everyone had their own watch. They would have their own clock. And you would have to set those watches and those clocks to be on the same time. The common experience for me is to think of like a television show or a movie where they would talk before they have to break into the museum to steal something. They would have to synchronize their watches so that they were all in the same time. That doesn't mean anything to us anymore because everything is already synchronized for us. In an earlier time, we might have thought of a different way of experiencing how we live time ourselves. I think back to my grandfather who worked in a car factory, and for him, he probably experienced time by the whistle blowing to start the workday, and again for lunch, to go to lunch, and again to come back from lunch, and again at the end of the workday. That these are ways that he experienced his cycle of life, something that for us no longer seems necessary because we are given reminders, very timely, very accurately timed reminders from the computer programs that we use. So those are some of the things that I think have changed greatly in this time. So the series that I'm bringing you, these 5 weeks on living prayer or structuring the hours of your day, had grown out of an exhibition that was held at the library back in 2018, in which we took the title Living Prayer to express kind of a duality of meaning. One is, of course, prayer being brought to life. That is, by saying prayers, by doing these actions, prayer becomes something that is all around us and that is something we experience. At the same time, it was taking the word prayer almost as an adverb and saying you are living through prayer, that you are living, your life is being formed through the prayer cycle, the prayers that you do. And this was an attempt to go into looking at the books in particular, since we are a library, that are related to the prayer life in the late Middle Ages and into the early modern period. In particular, books of hours, breviaries, and other kinds of books that were created to support that kind of prayer life. Part of this was perhaps a reaction on my part, that I looked at, we wanted to do an exhibition on books of hours, and I realized that I'm not an art historian. So for me to try to talk about the beautiful art or the school that the artist came from or the use of the color would have really would have sounded extremely hollow. And it seemed to me to make more sense to try to take these books at face value and to say, if one were to really follow them, if one were to follow this cycle of prayer that is laid out in the Book of Hours and the cycle of prayers that are laid out in the breviary, which monastic and religious communities would be following, how would that cause us to live our lives differently today? So to step back for a moment, to think about this from the perspective of the tradition that our library comes from, we are part of a Benedictine institution. We were started by Benedictine monks. So who is this guy Benedict? Well, Benedict, or as we call him today, Saint Benedict, was from Nursia in Italy, and he lived, we think, roughly in the late 5th into the mid 6th century. And the story is that when he was a student studying in Rome, that he became disenfranchised with the way life was in Rome, and he decided, very pragmatically minded, much like any teenager might do, he decided that he would go and live in a cave. And like any teenager, and I've had them in my household too, still have one, the idea that it was that you would take food or clothing with you was not necessarily something that first occurred to you. But supposedly he took books with him so that he could pray over these books. And over time, he moved away from a solitary life, a hermitage, more into a communal life, a life where he would be living with other monks who would have some sort of organization to keep their community as monks together and to keep it alive. He founded several monasteries around the area of Subiaco near Rome, and then later built his primary house at Monte Cassino, further south in Italy. And one of the things that he did in that time was to come up with what is now known as the Rule of Benedict. And the Rule of Benedict was basically an attempt to provide a structure for these communities to survive. And one of the things that was very important to the survival of the community was to come up with a system of prayer. The motto of the Benedictines, one of the mottos, became Ora et Labora, which is pray and work. And the thing is that they were put on equal value, that prayer is not something secondary to their lives. Prayer is not something that just comes in later, but it's something that you structure your life around. So just for a quick sidestep, part of the structure of this time, how you lead your life, is built around a calendar that lasts through the year, and that is reproduced in many of the books that are used for many of the books that I'm talking about in this series. And these calendars would provide you with special days of the year, special things that you might pray to this particular saint on this day or that particular saint, or you might pray on special feast days that would be the same every year. So things like the Annunciation, the Feast of the Annunciation, or the Immaculate Conception, those would be part of the cycle. And the calendar that you have is one that could be reused year after year, but you had to be able to use it. You had to do certain mathematical computation to figure out which day of the week your prayers would be on, so you would match up these things to keep your prayer life together. This liturgical year starts not on January 1st, but usually around late November with the beginning of Advent, which does change from year to year, so it will shift around a little. But this was all part of structuring your life throughout the year. Next comes the aspect of defining the hours of the day. And this is one of the things that Benedict goes into in really quite a lot of detail in the rule. The rule only has a little over 70 chapters, but 13 of those chapters are devoted specifically to how to arrange the prayers. And the prayers are essentially a cycle of reading the Psalms. And the Psalms are important as the spiritual center of their life. And the idea of doing it 7 times a day grew out of a line in Psalm 119 that says that I will sing your praises 7 times a day. Benedict added something to that, so it became 8 times a day. The 8th time was what's called Compline. Compline is the very last time of last prayers right before going to bed. The common names, these are actually quite are pretty cool. As you go through the day, you have matins, which would be prayed perhaps about an hour before dawn. That's something that you would be getting up, it would still be dark. You would pray for the longest prayers of the day. Then you might have a short break, and then as soon as the sun rises, you would have lauds, the name coming out of the word for praise, which was several of the Psalms used for that session refer to praise. And then an hour after that, you would have prime, so the first hour, then terce, the 3rd hour, sect, the 6th hour. 6th hour would be about midday, so that would be your lunch prayers. At 3 in the afternoon, roughly, you would have nones, that would be the 9th hour, followed in the evening by vespers, and then compline. Today, this is, of course, much simpler, done much more simply. We have morning, noon, and night prayers, but some communities still do a full complement of prayers throughout the day. And just to give an example, you can never go too far from home or even be at home without your copy of the rule. He'll say something like, Chapter 8, during the winter season, that is from the 1st of November until Easter, it seems reasonable to arise at the 8th hour of the night, so about 3 in the morning maybe. By sleeping until a little past the middle of the night, the brothers can arise with their food fully digested. In the time remaining after vigils, those who need to learn some of the Psalter or readings should study them. And he goes on to, he comments that having a little time between vigils and lauds gives the monks the opportunity to care for nature's needs. So there's very pragmatic advice being given in the rule here on how to structure your day and how to make these prayers fit into your day. So I need to be closing here, but what I would like to say is it might be an interesting experience sometime or an experiment to take your Outlook calendar, your Microsoft Outlook, and try to set these hours during the day. What would it be like to get up at 3 in the morning, to get up at 6 in the morning, to go back and pray at 7 in the morning, at 9 in the morning, noon? Would you be able to do that? Would you be able to maintain that in the way that we think today? It would be a challenge. So I just wanted to project into what's going to be coming up in the future. Next week we'll be talking about the Psalter and the Breviary, so the focus will be on the monastic and use of this structure of prayer and religious communities, and not so much on the lay communities, which will come later when we talk about the books of hours. And with that, I think I have to close for today. I look forward to having a chance to meet with you next week. Thank you very much for coming.